Can you hear me, Liz?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I don't know if they turned their mics on. I assume they didn't when they were talking.
Okay.
They went to executive session is what they wanted to go to do.
Okay. Thank you. Can Chloe remind them to turn their microphones on when they come out?
Yeah, have to go tell them they're not in here.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
I can remind them, no worries.
Thank you. Oh, boy.
First, I heard it was rehab, so. Okay.
In your, sorry, in your. I mean, I see, what, you must be. Superintendent?
No.
Business manager. Are you member of medical? Somebody overlap? Thank you. Okay.
Would you like to announce it?
Oh, that's very
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Do you have his resume?
I
Or
did.
did you print? Okay, I thought that.
I sent it to you.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Great. So this is my part. I think we'll kind of.
Oh my gosh, it's fine.
This would be another time.
My kids were like,
Where
where
are
are
you going?
to requirement? I was like, I'm going to.
So,
So
good.
I'm like, for you. All right, so we're gonna,
Oh. You guys, this time I turned them off.
all right, thank you, Jordan. Okay, so we are back in regular session and I would like to say welcome. We have decided to hire Chris McNamara as our finance director. Is that the official title?
Business.
As our business-
Business administrator.
As our business administrator for Lunenburg Schools, so. Welcome aboard and
Welcome.
thank you. Yeah, Chris is new to this kind of position, but is eager to learn and will be mentored and I think you're gonna get up to speed pretty fast. You have a good history. And I love the fact that you have teaching. Here. Oh, you wanna come? Yeah.
So currently I'm the fiscal director for the Montezuma Regional Planning Commission. It's actually a state agency. It's in Leominster.
Oh.
We serve the Montezuma region for economic development and transportation planning. I actually worked in schools for about 3 years as a tutor, working with students in special ed and credit recovery for Ingenuity, which is a credit recovery program. I worked in public accounting for about 3 years in Leominster. And then I also worked at, it's probably the largest credit union in the country now, since it merged recently at DCU for about a year in the finance office.
That is fantastic and we are very excited to have you coming aboard and yeah, thank you. All right, so congratulations and thank you and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Excuse myself for just a minute.
No problem. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's the board.
Okay, and oh, it's a revised agenda. Oh, you're right, executive session was first. This is it's a revised agenda. So first up under new business is, oh, we skipped the pledge. Okay, we're gonna do pledge real quick.
Okay.
We're new.
Your pledge executive.
All right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're getting much better about remembering them. Okay, so first item is donations. It is a donation gift acceptance to the Lunenburg High School Athletics from the Kevin T. Zozik Memorial Scholarship for Financial Trust in the amount of $895. So can I? Dr. Fortuna, is there more we need to know about this donation? Okay. All right, well, it is for the intended purpose is the Lunenburg Middle High School Athletic Department. Oh, thank you. And Mr. Zozik was a student athlete.
Yes, he was a victim of 9/11.
Yeah, and there's a memorial scholarship in his name. So thank you for that. Can we get a motion to accept that?
I make a motion to accept the gift.
Okay, all in favor? Tony's not on, right?
No,
Okay.
no, he's
So we
gonna
can
join
just
it.
do a regular vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, approved. Excellent, motion passes. Business administrator contract approval. Do we vote to officially approve the contract outside of, let's do that. Okay.
Executive session? Sure.
So we discussed the contract
for Mr. McNamara. Do you want to make a motion to?
Yes, I'll make a motion to accept the contract.
I'll
that we
second.
presented Mr. McNamara right now.
Literally right now. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Okay, motion passed. Okay, and now the last item on our agenda is a workshop from Tracy Novak of MASC on the roles and responsibilities of the school committee and superintendent evaluation, two topics which are going to come up a lot, that we should probably familiarize ourselves with. Okay,
Excellent. Thank you. It's good to be here. I grew up in Sterling, so Lunenburg is like, right in the neighborhood here. In fact, my orthodontist was in Lunenburg when I was growing up, so we came back and forth a lot. So yes, so let me just say, let's note, by the way, that you're in really good company. All of the field directors are out doing roles and responsibilities with lots of committees this time of year. Really, and we really appreciate that, because we'd like, in this point where you're sort of kind of taking a breath, for you to say, okay, now what part is our job? What part is the administration's job? How do we make sure that we're sort of, clearer in our mind before we start the school year? And then the other thing that we always really appreciate is when you're talking about evaluating the superintendent on this part of the year rather than on the other part of the school year, the emergency phone calls that we get in May where, suddenly we're getting a, wait, we have to evaluate the superintendent. As you'll see when we get to that part, it is a cycle. And so getting the beginning part right then makes the actual evaluation part much more something that is achievable and thoughtful and puts everybody on the same page. So we're going to take it in that order because obviously one of your roles is actually evaluating the superintendent. So I thought that made a little bit better deal. Now, for those of you who've been through roles and responsibilities in charting the course, which is the training that's mandatory for all new school committee members, you've heard us potentially mention in passing the state code of ethics. And by that, in this particular case, I'm not talking about Mass General Law, Chapter 268A, which is the state ethics law, but I'm talking about the one that was actually developed by MASC very early in our history, and is for many school districts actually part of their adopted policies. It's in Section B. And what that recognizes is that a school committee member really sits at the center of three areas of responsibility and relationship, really, which is the one that we talk about all the time, which is the one to your constituents, to your community, and so forth. But there are two others, which is the relationship that you have with the other members of your committee, and also the relationship that you have with your administration. And of course, you're in a really good place to actually be rethinking and thinking again about your relationship with your administration, given the cycle that you're in at this point. So I'm not going to read each of these. This is a document that we have online. You may well actually have it in your policy manual, something that's very common and very familiar. But first of all, the one, the relationship to your community. One of the things that we always think is important to stress is that your first responsibility is actually to the students of the school district, to the children in the town. As much as there are lots of other sort of pleas and pulls for your loyalties in other directions. We'll get more into that sort of where is the line in terms of administration versus policy as we go through here. One that sometimes can be tricky is that you work as a team and the decision is made as a team. Your responsibility then is to work together to positively carry out the decisions of the committee once they're made. Making yourself well-informed is actually part of your job. And you do represent the entire community. Again, the community, whether they agree with you or not, whether they voted for you or not, at all times. And committee work is really a means of unselfish service rather than something that you are to benefit personally from. So just a couple of general notes, obviously, first responsibility to the students. Something that was pointed out to me a number of years ago in my work was that for a lot of other elected offices, there's a term for it, right? You're a senator, you're the president, you're the governor. There isn't any such term for someone who serves on a school committee or a school board. You are a member of the board or the committee. You have no authority apart from your sitting at the table in a posted meeting talking about something under your purview. And that isn't always something that the community understands, something that has to be sort of emphasized to them. But it is something that's important to remember also as an individual on the committee. Contrary-wise, because coercive influence does actually exist, as much as that is the case there is a hat that you have that you don't take off that is always going to be perceived, particularly by those who work for the district, which is that you are a school committee member. And so, you know, for example, when you go in to meet with your child's teacher at a parent-teacher conference, that you're coming in as so-and-so's mom, and that's why you're there. The teacher, depending on your relationship, may be first seeing you as a school committee member. And that is an important thing to sort of continue to have in your mind as you're having conversations in the community. Any administrative responsibility or decision must be redirected to the administration. One of the things that committee members often discover, it's not written down anywhere, but an assignment that you kind of have is that you're one of the people who knows who people are supposed to call next. So when you get that, concern from a parent about X, Y, and Z, part of your job is the redirect of that parent to who the phone call goes to next. And the answer rarely is the superintendent, of course. Now, these two next ones are maybe less something we talk about. What is your responsibility to the administration? Doing the parts of your job that are assigned to you under Mass General Law is actually part of what you can do to ensure that you have a good working relationship with the superintendent and the administration, and you've supported them. For example, making sure that your policies are clear, they're ongoingly updated as necessary, because that's actually the framework within which the administration operates. That recognition of the chain of command is actually a way that you support the administration, right? When the phone call that comes in that's complaining about the third grade teacher doesn't immediately get redirected to the superintendent, but then goes to the teacher, then goes to the principal and so forth, is important. Also, I'm going to solve this is not actually ever a thing for school committee, right? Even if it's under your purview, it might be something that goes on an agenda, but largely the complaints and concerns are going to be directed to appropriate administrators. As we're going to talk about later, evaluation is part of your job, but you can really only evaluate appropriately if you allow the administration to do their job. So giving them full responsibility then allows you to responsibly evaluate how they are conducting that. And really, complaints should really only be coming to the school committee if solutions that have been redirected to the administration have failed, if efforts to sort of bring things to the administration's attention and have things solved as they're supposed to be appropriately fail. So a couple thoughts on that is you only act as a member of the committee. That is the only thing you have. Something that we recommend, it's a best practice, is to have agreed upon protocols. So something you might consider, particularly if new relationships here, is things like, can every member of the committee contact the superintendent individually? Does that have to go through the chair? Depends on the committee. Can every member of the committee contact, other members of the administration if you have, say, for example, a finance question, or do those go through the superintendent? It's good to have a generally agreed upon practice, among other reasons, so that the administration isn't spending undue amounts of their time responding to the school committee, because that isn't actually their first job. It's part of their job, but it's not the primary one. Similarly, sometimes we have people get on school committees who are very excited because they can now have all of their questions that they ever had about the school district answered. That's actually not why you're on the committee. And as much as, your, I'm sure, very beneficial curiosity being satisfied would be lovely, asking for creation of reports, investigation into areas on your own is not a power you as an individual school committee member have. Now, if you're asking for something that's a one-off of, did we have a Title I allocation last year and how much was it? If that's something you can't already look up on your own, that's one thing. But if you're asking for, what's the enrollment pattern been like for elementary schools in the district and in the surrounding districts for the past 10 years? That's one that needs to come on an agenda, and the committee needs to decide if that's actually how you want to allocate your time. The other thing, by the way, that does is frequently a question you have may be something that's coming up on a later agenda that the administration is planning on doing a presentation on enrollment once you, say, for example, submit the October 1 report to the department. There are logical places that questions can fall, and it's good to have those conversations at the same time. Making sure that you stay within your purview. You have an important purview. And one thing that we find is when committees start sort of running off to do the administration's job, they end up not doing their own job, which is a problem. So it isn't just that you shouldn't do the administration's job, you want to make sure that you're not distracted. I should note, by the way, that I'm happy to send this to you. So, I mean, take what notes you want to, but I will absolutely share it with you. And then, as I said, sometimes your job is just, okay, that's one where you would call the special education director as the answer to the parent, or here's the person you call when you have a concern about the school bus or whatever it is. And that is, you know, a useful role that you fulfill for your constituents. I also say, if you have questions along the way or you want to sort of flag something or ask for further clarification, let me know. With your fellow committee members, actions at official meetings are binding, even if you didn't vote for it. You do meet in public, you do vote in public, so it isn't as if your opposition to a decision that was made is a secret. So you shouldn't feel like you then have to spend, you know, forever after reiterating that this wasn't a vote that you took. That's actually already on the public record. The second part of that statement is a very good reminder for the very now classic question that comes up on the town Facebook page, and somebody tags in the entire school committee and asks how they're going to vote on that, which, yes, happens in just about every town in Massachusetts and probably not just here. Don't answer those. That doesn't mean don't respond, but that does mean don't answer the question. Among other things, you can very easily commit an open meeting law violation. But also, committee decisions are made at the table through deliberation, and sort of coming in with, I'm actually already going to vote this way, let alone attempting to say the committee is going to, because you actually have no idea, as much as you may think you do. So be careful about that. The second one is again a corollary of the first. This used to also sometimes happen, less so. Unfortunately, now we have less local press, but you'd have the reporter call up all the individual members of the school committee and say, this is on the agenda for next week. How are you all going to vote? And you'd essentially commit serial deliberation by reporter, which is also not a good idea. Executive sessions exist to preserve the interest of the district. So if you violate executive session, you're actually violating that. If you have pertinent information, share it. And this is also a good thing to establish through protocol. Does it go through the chair? Does it go through the superintendent's office? But if, you know, you've found something that's relevant for your colleagues to know, or for the administration to know, it's a good thing to know. And then make sure that you make decisions only after all the facts have been presented. So, you know, even if you're in the minority position, you're still a member of the committee. The second sort of part is we often will find if committee meetings are kind of running off the rails, you know, yes, the chair is the servant of the assembly, so it is up to the chair to ensure that the business of the committee gets done and gets done in good order. But there is a shared responsibility of the rest of the committee as well. To, you know, Mr. Chair, we've all actually now spoken on this item. It doesn't sound as if we have anything further to say. You know, I call the question. It's a parliamentary procedure to say that you know, that's the end of discussion and you're going to vote. We seem to be, you know, moving off of the item that's actually before us. We should make sure we bring ourselves back so that we're not falling afoul of the agenda. Those things are actually a shared responsibility of the rest of the committee. It's something that anyone can do. Decisions are made in committee meetings. They're not made ahead of time. I mean, otherwise the superintendent could just send out like a little survey and like we could just skip all the meetings. It doesn't work that way. And with good reason, there's information that comes forward during meetings. If you have information or knowledge or something that's a strength of yours, you know, sharing that is actually very useful and helpful. Only make decisions after all the information is shared and the matters are deliberated. And I should say, so before we go on to sort of another sort of just reminder of what your roles are and where the lines are, anything on that section? Any questions or comments or ask for clarification?
Can I just ask that,
You sure can.
is this all, like, all of this information you're presenting to us, is this in statute or how, like, why?
Nope. So the first part of this in terms of the roles and responsibilities was something that was developed based on statutes and regulations. Everything from Mass General Law, Chapter 71, which is what spells out what the responsibilities of the school committee are, as well as things like Mass General Law 30A, which is the open meeting law, and the other things, to put into a more of an operational framework,
Mhm.
how you then function as both a committee as a body and also as individual members within that framework.
Okay.
Yep. And that tends to be also why committees then have actually adopted it as policy, because policies, of course, are then sort of what you create as ancillary or adopt as ancillary to laws and to regulations.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this again is a way of attempting to imagine or to put into words the piece that is what is the superintendent's versus what is the school committees. And we phrase this a bunch of different ways because people may have different ways of sort of coming to the understanding. School committees are about governance, about sort of that general view of that big picture perspective. The superintendent, the administration is about the day-to-day management of the district. The administration is about the means, the strategies, action plans, procedures, and so forth. That ends where you're getting to, the vision, the mission, as well as policy, goals, budget belong to the school committee. In general, and these are very general because there always are exceptions, if it is the answer to what, why, or how much, it probably is the school committees, probably. The how much is very big picture, by the way. For the superintendent, it's how, who, when, or where, generally, again. In terms of that bringing to the table together for deliberation, the committee is operating as a bridge between the community to the superintendent, and the superintendent is the bridge between the staff and the work that you do on the committee. And then down here at the bottom is really tends to be the cycle or represent the cycle of much of the work that you do on the committee. So a lot of things you do are going to start with a recommendation from administration, whether it's the budget, a lot of policies start there, goal setting tends to start there. That will come over to the school committee for a deliberation and authorization or voting. It goes back to administration for implementation, and then it's being monitored by the committee. And that's, again, true of the budget, it's true of the goals, it's true of policy and so forth. And then, of course, what happens is that all of those things are cyclical. So your monitoring then will kick off potentially a new recommendation, certainly is how that happens with budget and with goals. Now, ideally, this is undergirded or really strained through trust and respect between the two parties, okay? And not just the superintendent as an individual, but also the administration in general. Sometimes we get asked, well, how do I know, or how can I be sure, or that kind of thing. There is a point at which some of this is also about professional, like respecting the professionalism of those who are involved. At that, you know, there's lots of checks and balances. There's also places where that's only going to go so far. One of the things that can bring one up short, you of course are being recorded here, is that for many members of your community, there's really three main places that they ever see the schools. They see your school buses on the road. They see you at town meeting when you show up and ask for millions of dollars. And if they're flipping through the local cable channel, may come across your meetings, which means that in terms of the sort of day-to-day action of the schools, you're kind of it. You're kind of the face of it. And that's a very different kind of realization when they start to, wonder how well are the schools being run, and is this done professionally, and are we meeting what we should be? If they're sort of sitting on their couch and flipping through the channels and come across whatever it is that's going on in the committee meeting, that's that can bring one up short depending on how things are going at the committee. So it's a good thing to keep in mind because ideally the work that you're doing together is actually going to then lead further to community to trust in the work that you're doing. Now, again, with that sort of what is your job as an individual versus what is the job of the committee? A committee member, as we said, has no individual authority, has exactly the same power as any other qualified voter. It's when you're walking around town or into the schools, that is exactly the role that you fill. You do have a responsibility to contribute to anything that you're doing. Vision, goals, budget, asking critical questions is actually part of your job. Once you've made decisions, supporting those decisions, and then always focusing again on the work on behalf of the students, that's actually what this is about. As a committee, you exercise power through official action at your properly posted meetings on things under your purview, govern through policy and through the budget. engaging the community. Again, as we said, often you're kind of the public face of the community, the committee of the district. So that's, part of your job. Obviously, there's at least one place where you're required to have a public hearing on the budget. So there are places where the community is essentially required to be invited to the table. Sustaining that relationship between the school committee and the superintendent. And then, of course, you're the employer of record for the purposes of collective bargaining. Now, I'm just going to run through kind of the what we think of as kind of the big ones in terms of your responsibilities. Your goal setting is that bottom piece and also some of that second piece. Now, we think of this in terms of a pyramid because these do actually build on each other. The administration's goals, the goals of the teachers, the school improvement plans all should be building on what you've set as the district goals. Now, as I note here on the bottom, though, there should also be interaction. So if there's a reason why you need to have a whole bunch of, particular things in the school improvement plans that you're seeing, that's something that should clearly be influencing the goals that you set for the district. Often is also going to be influencing the goals that are set for the superintendent. Teacher goals then also should be building off of that. And all of this at the end is actually focused on student achievement. Now, student achievement here, unfortunately in Massachusetts, we tend to lapse into always that being MCAS scores. It really isn't. This is really the goal of the direction should be about what the experience is of the students who are in your school building, how they're being supported, how they're being, their education is being furthered, how they're being furthered as people and so forth. Policy, of course, is yours. So a policy statement is any clear statement of the purposes and prescribing direction. To go back to what you were just asking in terms of, where did this come from? That's really why you potentially, why that's sort of set out for some districts as sort of, we intend to act this way, right, as a policy statement. They are for the parts that apply outside of the parts that you apply to yourself. So everything largely outside of section B are for the administration to give direction, and they're formal statements that are adopted by the committee. Now, there is, of course, a policy manual that you have that every school district in Massachusetts has. There also are lots of other places where policy lives, right? So it lives in the student handbook that you review annually. There's policy statements that are in grants that you accept that are in your collective bargaining agreement. And of course, the big one that you adopt every year is you're making policy decisions through your budget when you're allocating things. So keep in mind that those are not separate. They actually are part of the same thing. You're frowning. I figured the frowning was leading to a question. No, okay.
No, I liked the way it was framed as union contracts are also.
Yeah, no, you're allocating staff time, you're making decisions about priorities, all of those things.
So I
Yes.
that view.
Absolutely. Good. Yeah. I'm glad that's helpful. So budget, of course, is yours. And not just the adoption of the budget that you take sometime in the spring for the next fiscal year. You do have fiscal policy. So there's policies that are in your policy manual in section D and elsewhere that actually are setting out, how money is allocated and making sure that you align with purchasing laws and all those kinds of things. Then there is monitoring that takes place over the year, and whether you decide to whether you do quarterly budget reporting, which is something that MASBA recommends as a best practice. When you work through transfers that have taken place between cost centers, the signing of warrants, all of those things are actually fall under yours. Now, again, you're part of a larger check and balance system, right? So this doesn't only fall to you. The day-to-day part is always under the administration. But the financial piece, and this is also one, by the way, that's good, although I rarely have to tell school committee members this, that they're not already doing it, is the sort of, okay, and what happens next part, right? So yes, we're just a month in on implementing fiscal year 26. We're already starting to get questions about fiscal year 27. So, that kind of thing can be a useful role of the school committee as well, of sort of what is going on at the national level, what's going on at the state level, and so forth. And then in terms of personnel, the hiring and contracting the superintendent, as you well know, it's obviously yours. You also are the ones who hire and retain legal counsel. Legal counsel works for the school committee, not for the administration, though administration obviously is going to be consulting with your legal counsel. You have, as you just have very well functioned, advise and consent on assistant superintendent positions, school business manager positions, director of special education, and all of these cases, or whatever it's called here, right? So this may not be the term used. Physicians, nurses, and attendance officers. And then, of course, there are pieces that also are yours, right? So employer of record for the purposes of collective bargaining, the personnel policies that you establish both in and outside of the contract, and then establishment of compensation, which simply means that for things like principals or administrators, you're not having that contract brought to you, with the exception of those that are here. But the general sort of, we pay people within this realm, and they have X number of vacation days, and they have this kind of setup for sick days and so forth, is for the school committee to work out with the superintendent. And then it is up to the superintendent to actually have those individual contracts with those individuals. And those are the things that have to do with your roles and responsibilities. Any questions on that before we talk about eval? Okay.
So can we talk a little bit about the role of school committee versus town departments when it comes to management of things? We're currently
Sure.
in discussions in town with the finance committee and the select board about
Okay.
about cost savings and combining departments.
Yes.
So can we talk a little bit about what the school committee is responsible for versus the town side of things?
Sure.
So I think what Lauren's saying, right, is if the town were to recommend that we collapse, for example, our departments that take care of facilities, right?
Yep.
What sort of responsibility would you see us having in that conversation, right? Is that sort of what you're?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about where our purview is versus the town.
Right, and
a
like
little
what would
bit.
happen then? I mean, I think one of the conversations that we had at our last meeting with all the boards was, when the town manager and the superintendent, if they had someone working under both of them, how would that work?
Yep.
And then how would we have a role?
Yeah, and are we
Yep.
giving up our
Something that's
budget
our
power
job.
if we hand over maintenance,
Right.
but we're still paying
Yep.
the maintenance salaries out of our budget,
Yes.
but they're no longer our employees? Are there clear delineations of responsibility? there?
So not offhand, however, you have or should have an agreement with the town about sort of what they get to charge you, right?
Yeah.
As kind of in-kind services already. So the first thing I would say is that, make sure that you're all familiar with what it currently says. You would want to make sure that anything you change goes into that in clear detail about all of those kinds of things. Who's paying for what, how much of it, lines of who gets to ask for what. I guess I would have two observations. There are a couple places in Massachusetts that have done it successfully. I guess I would have two observations. One is that not infrequently, the schools employ more people than the town does, not just overall, but often within departments even, right? Leading to more than one. I mean, often it's the CFOs joking, well, maybe we should be the ones who are running the department rather than you, but
Yeah.
and that's a joke, by the way, for any town person who's listening and finds out later. I'm not saying you can't do it. But that is something to keep in mind because, I mean, we often will hear, well, the town could just handle all HR or could handle all whatever. And the answer is that you essentially have an ant trying to swallow the elephant or something of the equivalent, right? That's probably a slightly outsized analogy, but something of that nature. The other thing is, what happens, of course, is that how responsive are they going to be?
Yeah.
And particularly because we're talking about the buildings and the facilities that people are sending their children to every day. And so it's one thing if you're getting the phone call and you can then deflect that to the superintendent who's talking to somebody who works directly for the superintendent. And you are talking about a section of your budget that you not only allocate, but you oversee, and you can have a conversation about, are we spending enough money on custodial staff or on cleaning supplies or what have you, right? Do we need new equipment for snow blowing, that kind of thing? My recommendation would be that you're very, very clear on how that part is going to work because, I mean, generally the answer is that then gets offloaded to the town. I'm not really sure you'd want to talk with legal counsel about the notion of sort of dual reporting for a facilities director. But generally speaking, it sort of gets offloaded to the town. And the bad case is that then the schools don't feel like they're being responded to. I mean, I was actually just having this conversation with colleagues earlier because there's a city where the city is attempting to take over the IT department. And one of our conversations was, okay, the city's IT department is like the guys who are running the DPW computers and like the city treasurer. Do they realize that this now puts them in, like, if they did that, they're now responsible for every single kid's Chromebook in the entirety of the city, school department. I think that sometimes, like, what exactly does this mean and what does it entail? Like, if they're going to take over facilities, are they taking over custodial? Do they understand this means that when a fourth grader throws up in a classroom, like, that's theirs? Like that, I think having some very real conversations maybe about that would probably be wise.
Is it recommended generally to, especially we've talked a lot about how it probably wouldn't save money because it's not like it would lower our.
Well, that always is also the thing is that unless you're going to potentially fire an administrator of some kind, somebody who's an overseer, there usually isn't a lot of cost savings. Is the other challenge.
Okay. Are there places you know of that have combined and then uncombined? We did that several years ago with IT. Specifically.
That would be a good question for the MASC listserv. Also, the superintendents may have experiences, right? The superintendent's listserv may have questions. I know I saw a presentation at a MASBO conference a couple of years ago from two towns that had done it and had done it successfully. I don't know. I wouldn't at all surprise me if there were ones where they had done it and then had to undo it, but I don't know offhand.
Okay. Because it's easy to find the places that have, but
Yes.
I'm curious about places that have.
Where did it fall apart?
And what
Yes.
were the issues that?
Right. No, that would be a good conversation then to have, right? And is there a way of potentially fending that off?
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up. Relevant conversation to have.
You want to share?
All right. So talking then about superintendent evaluation, this is directly state regulation, right? 603 CMR 35, which is the educator evaluation system in general, right? So part of what happened as a result of the 2011 Act relative to the achievement gap is that superintendent evaluation was standardized across the state. It didn't used to be. You used to be able to kind of do your own thing. Part of what the state recognized in that law and then the ensuing regulation was that superintendents are educators. We need to have a way of ensuring that we are evaluating them in a standard fashion. And so they are part of the same evaluation system that is done through every teacher, for every principal, for every assistant superintendent, for school business officials in the Commonwealth. There are some pieces that are identical, and then there are parts that you'll be developing locally for yourself. The intent here is that remember, we talked about things being a cycle, and this is really another one where this is intended to be a cycle of continuous improvement for the superintendent, where the evaluation is not, you did this terribly, you did this well, but you can certainly do some of that. But some of it is also, here are things you seem to be doing better at. Here are things I see you being able to get stronger at, those kinds of things. Does have to be should be tied to your district goals or what improvement goals you have. And there are multiple criteria for educator success, again, which are common across the state and then also are related to the others. Yes.
What's the penalty if we don't?
I wouldn't want to have that conversation. Well, my question would be whether or not the superintendent might lose their license.
So our decision not to evaluate her could cost us our license.
And this is me guessing. I have never asked the department that question. You're required to, every educator is required to be evaluated. They all go to the department. So
What would be the legal basis of extending her license?
and she's as an educator in Massachusetts, she's required to be evaluated either annually or biannually.
Right, but like.
It's in the state evaluation.
Specifically, give them the ability to.
Because the department has the ability, grants the license and the department has the ability to take it away. Like that's just, it's state law.
What,
The licensure provision, just like that's,
what's the rep?
I would have
Is
to.
your
look at
mic on, by the
the
way?
licensure offhand. I wouldn't, I mean. Yeah. I mean, you're also setting a terrible example for the rest of the district because every teacher has to be evaluated. So,
Sure. But what I'm saying is like, when we do this, the process is so onerous and so complicated and the forms are just voluminous. At the end of the day, I feel like we're not getting anything out of it because it's just like, we check this box, then we give her a score between 1 and 4. And like, the things that I found more insightful are comments that are included in the evaluation as opposed to going through this rubric. And so the question is, why do we have to do this rubric instead of just providing comments?
well, you aren't only doing the rubric, you're also setting goals and you're also evaluating based on those goals, which have to be aligned with the rubric and also aligned with the goals that you've set for the district, which is entirely local district kind of
Sure.
purview and things that you should be doing. So if you're not getting anything out of that, that's sort of, you need to then talk about what goals you're setting and how you're tying them into the rest of the standards. Because the other thing is that the standards, the indicators under the standards should be tied directly into your goals. And if they're not, then you are choosing to isolate that rather than actually tying it into the part that you've decided locally.
So the 3503 says that they shall establish evaluation systems and performance standards for the evaluation of all teachers that include all principles of evaluation. Is that same general statement true for the superintendent?
In terms, that's directing the department to do that. So yes,
It says school committees shall, not the department.
is what the state has said that this is a mandated process.
Sure, but what I'm saying is, what about the process is mandated?
That's exactly the presentation we're doing right
Okay.
now.
All right.
So as we said at the beginning, part of what is smart about what you're doing right now is you're doing this at the beginning rather than at the end. Because doing it at the end means that you're playing catch up rather than starting from a strong place. In your case, because you're talking about a relationship that's as new it is, you will be required to do annual evaluations. Long-serving superintendents who have been in their position for some time and have a length of experience can, if the committee chooses, move to buy-in to every other year. You are required to use a standard format. You do have a flexibility in terms of adaptation, in terms of the pieces of the standards that you're using and also the goals that you write locally and also when you choose to do it. So as we said, this, like so much else that you do, is a cycle. Starts with a self-assessment of the superintendent, which moves to goal setting. Generally, as we talked about with some of the other things that you do, goals are being brought forward for the superintendent for your discussion and potential approval. You do have the authority to change them or adapt them as you wish as a committee. The superintendent then moves forward with the implementation of those goals. And there is then a mid-cycle review, which is a formative process. That is not something that involves your individually scoring the superintendent. That's usually more of a conversation that happens at a school committee meeting. And then there's obviously then another round of implementation and then an end of cycle review, which is the summative assessment. That also, by the way, then should be kicking off the next cycle, which would then be leading to the next round of goal setting. Good question.
So as someone who's very new to this, I find all of this very abstract.
Sure.
I find everything that Desi does incredibly abstract. I tried to be on a committee with our last superintendent. I found everything we talked about as very abstract. As someone who is not an educator, who just has children and has worked in other fields. So can we talk about this in an actual?
Yes. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, like an actual, like,
No,
what does
this-
the goal look like? Right?
Yep.
Like, you tell me a goal, what are we actually evaluating
That's-
on?
What the next slides are. We're on
Right.
slide 2, guys. So let's make sure that we're actually talking, like getting to the places that there are. So as we said, we're talking, the evaluation is the end of the process, but you need to make sure that you're thinking of evaluation as a year-long process, not just something that happens at the end. The rubric itself, or what you may think of as the rubric itself, has 2 parts, which is evaluation based on the goals that you have set, as well as the standard rubric. And then within that rubric, you're rating on the goals, you're rating on the standards, and then you're evaluating as a summative process. So as we already said, you've already saw this presentation, this part of the presentation. Your goals that you set for the superintendent, which are here, should be based on the goals that you set for the district. Again, this is school committee based, right? So school committee is actually doing this part of the job. The requirement is that goals be SMART goals. Questions that we recommend that you ask. So how do you
What's
make
SMART
sure?
goal?
That's on the next slide. Questions that we recommend as you're developing them are essentially, what are we about? So part of the conversation to have is, you know, if the district already has a strategic plan or already has set 5-year goals or 3-year goals or something of that nature, then that's as it is and you're basing it on that. If instead what you're doing though is starting from scratch, an evaluation of where the district is and what it is that you're working on is really the first step, because you need to be thinking about the district before you then move on to what about the superintendent as the executive of the district. These are some things we recommend that you consider as you're doing that. So SMART goals are specific and strategic, right? The specific part is actually, and this is, and honestly, not just SMART, this specific part, but also the measured part. One of the things that you should ask yourself when you're setting a goal for the superintendent is, when we get to the end of the school year, what am I going to see that is different so that I know that it has been achieved? Okay. Frequently, an easy one, right, is that we're going to achieve a particular percentage change on some standard of measurement that we actually assess students based on. So there's been a lot, for example, on early literacy. A lot of school districts have been setting assessments based on their internal literacy rather than MCAS, because MCAS comes in so late. That over the course of the year, a particular percentage of third graders are going to move from here to here within their particular thing. That's a pretty straightforward student-centered goal.
And how, as a school committee, do we know what the standard should be?
Because the self-assessment of the superintendent is going to be coming forward with recommendations as to potentially what the goals are and what you're going to be working at over the course of the year.
Okay.
Yep, that's why it starts with that. Now that's, but then that's, well, and that's one that's very,
Honestly.
well, and to your point, that's one that's actually very sort of technical and very academic based.
Yeah.
There also, though, are committees that do things like say, you know, we had a really rough budget year last year. We need to actually change. We need to change some part of our budget process. Now, the trick here is to balance out which part is ours versus the administration's, right? Because maybe you're setting a school committee goal as part of that too. But your goal can be, you know, the superintendent is responsible for ensuring that we have quarterly budget reports. The goal can be, we're going to have X set up by particular date, or we're going to have we're going to beat these particular benchmarks in terms of when we have what ready for the budget, because we think we need to do it on a different timeline. Those are things that are reasonable, and also are, again, it's one of those where you don't want to just say we want a better budget process or we want something of that nature. You want to make sure that you can say, yes, we've actually gotten there at the end of the year, or we got close, or here's the pieces we got and here's the pieces we didn't. You're required, we'll have that on a later slide, but you're required to have at least 3. We always recommend that you not go, it's very easy to sort of say, okay, but we also want this and we want that. And that leads essentially to not only a distracted school committee, it can lead to a distracted administration.
And Kate suggested 1 at our last meeting.
Well, you have to have them in 3 realms. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I remember she just said yes, right?
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of documentation. The superintendent, when it comes time to the evaluation later, it's a lot of work to get together all of the documentation. So the less goals we have, the more specific we can be and focused on those things. And it makes for less work in the end for us evaluating and for the superintendent to put together. But I mean, the goals can be related to each other. They do have to be in the 3
realms. Yep, but they can be related to each other. They can also be related potentially to other work that either you're doing as a district or the school committee is doing. And you'll see when we get a little later on to your point, because the last thing we want to have is the committee sort of only looking at the documentation at the end of the year. So one of the things that's recommended is not only the question of the formative assessment, but that the reports that you're getting from the superintendent over the course of the year are tied back into the goals. And you actually explicitly essentially express that as part of the reports that are at your school committee meetings.
And we only evaluate on the goals So
Mhm.
it makes it, if we don't have as a goal something, then we can't
Yeah.
evaluate on that. So we do have to pick a wider thing, a
Mhm.
wider scope, instead of just one thing.
I mean, I want to say this, like, the process set forth in the regulation is not this. This is something different. The way that the packet comes to us is there are 4 areas: instructional leadership standards, the management operations standards, the family and community engagement standards, the professional culture standards, and we go through and they're like laid out based on the regulation. And then we say like, the superintendent will say like, here's evidence that I've done these things and met these goals, whatever they are. But we're not limited to that. Like, obviously, if something happened where, and it's not gonna happen, but like if the superintendent like came to work drunk and crashed the building, crashed it, it's not like we can't be like, oh, wow, we're gonna have to, it wasn't one of our goals to avoid coming to work drunk. So like, we can do things outside this, what this presentation is. I also want to say, it might be more helpful if instead of having a presentation, we have a dialogue. We said 4 times already that you're gonna get there. Like, I think that given.
Because you're actually, because we're actually building upon the things that we've already had.
Right, let's
And
have a
you all-
conversation.
And you all are at different levels in terms of the experiences that you've had.
Sure.
So this is based on our experience of people who aren't familiar with the evaluation system and making sure that we lead you there and that you've actually gotten the information that you need in the order in which you need it for it to build upon itself.
I'm just gonna.
So
MASC needs to be aware that we have certain needs. I'm asking you to have a conversation with us.
you're asking to have a conversation, and what I've been asked to do is actually teach you how to do the evaluation, which is what I'm doing.
I'm getting. stuff
So,
from the
yep.
PowerPoint, and I think we can have a
Okay.
conversation after we get the information.
All right. I also asked that it be a half hour.
Yep, and that's why I called you this morning that said that it was not actually possible to do roles and responsibilities and superintendent evaluation in that amount of time.
I don't really, like, we need to have some responsivity from MASC. This happened when we were doing the superintendent.
Yep,
hiring
so I
process.
called you back.
Bring now. I understand you called me back. We are the people that you are presenting the information to.
Yes,
If we're
and-
asking questions and you're saying, I'm not gonna answer that until later. Like, you gotta be able to mix it up a little and answer questions.
I'm actually going to answer the questions in the order in which they are going to legally, logically make sense,
Answer the questions in the order they're asked.
because we're actually going to be putting them into the context so that rather than jump ahead and talk to you about what SMART goals are, we're actually going to talk about what makes for a good goal, which is what we just did before we talk about a SMART goal, which is actually how you'd decide whether or not it's a good goal.
I understand that you have the power, but we have questions.
Yes, and you should ask them when we get to the part that has to do with it.
But we
That's
don't
why we
always
do
the
that.
presentation.
And that's why I'm telling you.
So have a discussion.
No, that's why I'm telling you when things are going to be coming up so that you actually can reference the information as we get there. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you're doing as you do part of this, remember we talked about the fact that you actually have a timeline in which you're doing this, right? So you're going to have an annual evaluation. When is it that the particular things are going to be achieved is actually part of this decision-making process that you want to be making, setting that potentially as even part of the goal. Making sure that they're both realistic and also that they're rigorous. And that is actually a balance in terms of making sure that they both are something that is achievable, but also is setting a high standard isn't something that you're going to necessarily sort of fall backwards into. So again, as we said, you want to make sure that you're starting at the beginning, which then makes things easier as you go through things. So the drafting of the goals, as you've been already outlining, ends up making a great deal of difference as to then where you end up at the end, making sure that they're actually relevant, that they're based on local data, local priorities, other priorities that you've set. You are allowed, if you wish, and by this, by allowed here, I mean in terms of an open meeting law perspective, to use a subcommittee. Just realize that this deliberation would have to happen in public session if you choose to actually appoint a subcommittee to work on drafting goals. Final approval of the goals is done by the full committee and is under your purview. What you should be doing as part of the same thing, so you would create the goals and then look at the 4 standards and look at the indicators under those standards, right? So if you're talking about instructional leadership, there's a number of different categories under instructional leadership. If, as we talked about before, part of what we were talking about was what would be a good goal? You could set a goal that had to do with third grade literacy levels. If you were doing that as part of, for example, the high dosage tutoring that the department is actually now funding, if you were doing that potentially as part of the efforts around adopting different kinds of curricula, you might actually take 1A, which is the curriculum indicator, and say, we're going to do that one.
And that's a
Yep.
document we're gonna get that already has all these.
That already has all of the indicators under each of the 4 standards.
And
Yes.
that's what the DESI has. put
And that's the
together.
part that yes, that's the piece that you're required to do, is to hit the 4 standards that are already existing. You do not have to, I'm going to say this more than once because it's actually it's a newer development. You do not have to evaluate based on all of the indicators that are under each of the 4 standards. So you have to know 4, but then each of them has subsections. Pick each of the subsections that have to do with the goals, because then it's actually all tied together in terms of it becoming part of one evaluation.
We'll have Liz, ask Liz to drop into their folders because they don't, the other 3. Tony and I have it, the old rubric from the previous superintendent, and how that worked, and the old goals. Just so you guys can see what it looks.
Yeah, I'd like to
It's-
see what one looks like.
Yeah, it was very helpful for me to see.
Yeah, I just.
Older one.
And the other thing that's
None of my
also,
jobs have I ever had to do anything like this.
No,
So-
it's
And honestly,
one-
I hate process.
well, and one of the things that's
suck.
actually pretty important to keep in mind is that everybody else who does the evaluations under these standards does it as part of their full-time professional job. Only school committees are doing it as
Yeah,
their,
That's why I'm
It's a
saying it's
thing,
not.
absolutely.
Out of this seems out of the ordinary for us.
Yes.
Probably not you. But our administrators also go through this process with the same SMART goals and the same setting, and then the administrators do that
Right.
for the teachers, and so we're not being asked to do anything. We're not asking our admins and teachers.
Which is
to do
fine.
it.
I just want to do a good job at it and I hate when
Mhm.
I don't like.
It's really amorphous at first,
It's
so
true. I
that's
was
why
on this committee last year with Kate and 2 years ago with Kate, and it was the worst experience of my life. The
Mhm.
DESI people are not you. The people at DESI had all these, and I'll tell you this, Dr. Fortuna, like they talk in a language I don't understand. And I feel pretty educated on some of this stuff. I have little kids, like, and you're like, what is this? What is the actual core of what we're trying to do here?
Mhm.
It was about family engagement. And I was like,
Oh, you were on that.
it was awful.
Yeah, so like the core of what we're talking about is the regulation 3504. And like, I think like this presentation is helpful, but like what we should focus on when we're doing the evaluations is what the regulations say.
what you
So-
probably want to do is not take the regulation in isolation, because the department has issued governance documents
Sure.
around that, which is what
The
this,
thing that we're doing is we're evaluating based on the regulation.
Right, I know.
And the
So-
regulation says, here are these 4 things, here's how you find them. So.
So, and Dr. Fortuna will give us some examples of things and then we will evaluate that.
absolutely.
That's part of it, like part of the question is always like, as a layperson, right, how am I?
And I'll come to you with some draft goals
Yeah,
based on
absolutely.
what I'm getting out of my entry.
Yeah,
planning.
budget.
Well, and that's part of what will be great with having a new superintendent, is she's already sort of having the conversations as part of her intake process of sort of, where are we at? What do we need to do? Where do we need to move next? So that's very useful. One of the things that you are allowed to do is, as far as I know, has never been done by any school committee, but you can certainly do, is you can choose to not evaluate the 4 standards equally. If you want to, you can weigh them differently. If you're going to do that, you have to decide at the beginning and have the committee agree that that's how you're going to do it, to also decide what the weighting actually is. And then this is the part, and this is in bold for a reason, because this is what influences the rest of your year. How are you going to know, to your point, how are you going to know that you actually got to the goal? What do you need to see? What actually needs to be shown to you? What evidence is going to be brought forward for you to know that the goal has been achieved or not, right? And again, that's not something that should only be happening at the end of the year. That's not something that you should be getting only access to when you're actually also then getting, here's the document. You should be seeing that over the course of the year as part of the work of the district, because that is the work of the district. That's what's happening. One of the things that we recommend, by the way, is it's helpful to potentially establish a year-long agenda as part of that, even if you're not deciding what you're going to talk about at every single school committee meeting at the beginning of the year. There obviously are things that happen on a regular basis as part of the cycle of the school that you know you're going to get. If those have to do with the goals that you've set, you all know come October, we're going to talk about enrollment. Come this month, we're going to talk about this. Those are useful things as well in terms of check-in. They're useful generally, but they're certainly useful in terms of the evaluation. Making sure that you not only agree on the goals, but you have an idea of how you're going to know that you got there. You've decided ahead of time which indicators under the standards you're going to use, right? You hit all 4 standards, but you're not using all of the indicators. As we said, not too many. If you're going to be weighing, make sure that you've agreed ahead of time as to what that looks like and make sure everybody understands the weighing. Discuss what the evidence is. So how are you going to know that this work has happened? And the phrasing here is deliberate because to your point, the part of the reason that the evaluation instrument and the implementation was tweaked a couple of years ago was that the superintendent is the only educator who is evaluated not really on what you are seeing in her day-to-day work, because it's not like you're following her around, right? So that question of how are you going to be brought to understand the work that she is doing is actually a really important way of sort of framing the question. Potentially create a year-long agenda in terms of how you're going to be getting progress over the course of the year rather than just at the end. You're not doing a document. So here's your 3 areas, right? You need to have at least 3 goals. One that's a district improvement goal, one that's a professional practice goal, one that's a student learning goal. You do have to have each of those. And then they should meet as all the things that we've already mentioned in terms of being SMART goals. And you do need to be you're not only evaluating at the end of the year, but you should be getting an update on each of the goals at the summative report as well, right? Which is usually kind of a mid-year point. That's another reason, by the way, to have a year-long agenda, because we often find committees getting kind of a little bit more than halfway through the year and realizing that they haven't done a summative evaluation. So rather than scramble, start the year knowing where you're going to get. So here's the 4 standards, right? Instructional leadership, operations and management, family and community engagement, professional culture. 3 of these are shared by every educator. The professional culture is something for the superintendent to establish. And as you've seen in the rubric, the 4 standards, those are the highest level. And then they're broken out into indicators, which are really subcategories under each of those, right? So things like operations and management has everything from budget to facilities to adhering to law and regulation and so forth. And then the descriptors going across are how you actually establish what the levels are. So this is A1, right? Curriculum, as we were mentioning, this is what it looks like. The entirety of the rubric is available online. And it is really one where when you're talking about the goals, then having the list of the indicators open in front of you to say, okay, well, this then is supported by this indicator, and that indicator. That then also allows you to make sure that you're hitting all 4 standards, that you're being thorough in how you're evaluating the goal. And again, that makes it a cohesive process rather than we have to do these over here and we have to do these over here. When you're evaluating the goals, you're also evaluating the standards by evaluating the indicators. To keep in mind, by the way, the high degree of achievement here is considered proficiency. It is intentionally phrased that way. Exemplary literally is that you would put your superintendent forward as someone who could teach other people across the state how to do this. So this is very much not a grading system in terms of A, B, C, D. It's very much not, it's intentionally one that works through language rather than through, for example, numbers. I always get nervous when I see, reports of the superintendent got a this in terms of an A or a 4, or that it's not actually designed to work that way intentionally. So in terms of which parts do you have to do and which parts do you not have to do, the 3 goals, right, at least, covering the 3 areas for sure, regardless. You have to rate on all 4 standards. And then you do have to take those 3 and those 4 and create an overall summative rating. Now,
Goals are not attached to the 4 standard.
so that's the one where you're picking the indicators under each of the 4 standards that are actually supporting the goals. So like we were talking about, if we took that 3rd grade reading level as one of the goals, if you made that your student learning goal for the year, then you might take pieces under instructional leadership that have to do with implementation of curriculum as the indicators that you're also evaluating. And then you do the same thing with your district improvement goal. If you were going to have one that was on budget, you might then take the indicator under management and operations that has to do with budget, and you'd pick that one. So that way you're actually then taking both halves and you're evaluating the two things together.
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
So you have to rate all 4 standards for each of the 3 goals, correct?
Nope, think of them as separate.
Okay.
Think of, right, so you have to rate all 4 standards in together.
Okay.
You have to rate all 3 goals. You should be making sure that the
Gotcha,
way that
just
you've
the
set
thing.
yourself up to
Okay.
evaluate, to take those 4 standards has to do with the goals.
Got it.
So are you doing 7 numbers or are you?
You're not doing, so you shouldn't be doing numbers at all. How many indicators you choose under the standards is up to you. Right? So you could choose 3. That's what this was.
Sorry, I really,
No.
Without jargon, don't use the language in stack.
So the
No, because that way you're actually gonna be able to
indicator-
find it on the chart, right? So this is an indicator.
It's in,
It's about
35
34.
or so there.
Yeah.
what is the
Mhm.
indicator? I still don't
It's a-
understand.
it's a-
That one.
It says-
Yes. So like, this is think about it like this. We're gonna evaluate,
I'm sorry. I have to-
we're gonna evaluate Dr. Fortuna on instructional leadership standard. Under that, we're gonna be looking at whether or not the curriculum was done well, instruction was done well, assessment was done well, evaluation, those kind of things. So like, this is the genus, and these are the species underneath it.
Okay, but what is the 3 goals?
Right, so that's
The
for you
goals are
to,
separate.
that's for you to establish.
We-
That's for you to establish.
And it could be they could be things that we want her to accomplish in any one of those 4 domains.
And it can be things, that's the kind of thing you might put like a data point on.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how do you,
Like
how
if our
do
goal
you?
was to develop a new curriculum, then that would.
Correct, that would fall under this first one.
Right, so then if that was your goal,
So we could-
right, so if that was your goal, then you would say, and we're going to make sure, we're going to evaluate instructional leadership based on 1A curriculum. And, whatever other ones under instructional leadership you choose based on those 3 goals.
Also, the goals are not completely designed by Dr.
Correct.
Fortuna is gonna.
She's going to come forward with you. Yes,
She feels like the district is gonna work on them. We're going to approve those goals. So,
And then we're going to.
and then we're gonna work on
evaluate
them together and then evaluate.
Culture,
together.
how do you evaluate a superintendent on having a good culture?
So like, one of the things that we did,
Community.
like, for
Well, and
example,
how are we judging?
like, here's an example. When we did the bus form.
Yeah.
We had a measurable goal of getting 100%. And then we were able to evaluate her based on the percentage of bus forms. And then the things that we did was, we looked at how did she get those? And then the results of those efforts, right? So she, sent home parent communication, she
Yeah.
put up the sign they borrowed from the cops. She like created like a procedure to
Yeah.
call
Email
people
them.
who are traditionally not involved with the school. And that was the way that we were able to evaluate. She like said, this is what my goal is. Here's what I plan to do. And then we went back and said, okay, she did A, B, and C. And she, I think, didn't we get 100% one year? I thought we got either like all but 100% or like 99.98.
That was one of our goals, but
Yeah,
yeah. we got-
but like that
we
was the
got
way to,
100%.
yeah, so like that would be an example of how we would do it.
And that could be
Yeah,
community.
we did family and community engagement, and that was also, one of the goals that we had, 2 years ago, because it reset, or was gonna reset, yeah, we did the evaluation 2 years ago.
Mhm.
And it was family community engagement, and then it informed some of the areas, I don't have it in front of me, but
Yeah.
it was informed by some of the curriculum or the other standards.
could be.
They tie into each other, it's a very. They-
That's why it's important that you don't have to do all the indicators anymore, because that wasn't true in 2011.
Oh my, so, we. For them, and community engagement, we had a STEM night, and then look for things, and then, say, okay, this is great, we've improved family community engagement, and this is exemplary, because we should be giving this example to other people, or you can say, what, okay.
That's why it should be specific.
Yes.
Well, because we
Yeah.
have to be able to have documentation to support it,
Right.
kind of like an IEP per child.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
Like,
good
you
way. of
have to
challenging.
have
Oh,
Yep.
that's a good way.
documentation to support that you are implementing the best next step.
Yes. And you asked about professional culture. That's another one where sort of what are the things that the superintendent either did or enabled to have happen within the school district, right?
Yeah.
So if you survey the staff, remember that it's actually all of your evidence has to come through the superintendent. So it's a superintendent, that, but it could be that, there are people who are doing book studies, or you've actually brought in particular kinds of professional development, or that you've, rearranged the schedule to allow for learning communities, or like, those are kinds of things you could potentially be doing. Mhm.
Where do you say that the evidence has to come in through the super?
All evidence for every educator has to come in through the educator. It's part of the governance documents.
Okay, where in the regulation?
I'm not going to do the regulation by regulation, but I'm also going to tell you that you're not only bound to the regulation, you're also bound to the governance of the department.
What tool are you, when you say it must be done this way? Like, you're giving evasive answers and I want to.
No, I'm not giving evasive answers. I'm telling you that it's from the department.
Give me the answer. Where does it say that?
I will look it up and I will email it back to you.
Okay.
So in terms of
Go on. Where it says.
yeah, I'm not going to actually stop the presentation to actually go look this up.
To educate us.
Yep. And so I'll look it up and I'll get back to you on that. Yep. You asked me a question and I will look it up and get back to you, but I do not have that on the tip of my finger, and I will look it up and get back to you. So as we mentioned, not all indicators have to be used. And in fact, the reason that we had a revision on process was to have everybody recommend, including MASs, that you not use all the indicators. You do have the ability to weigh the standards differently. The timing of the evaluation cycle is up to you, and I'm going to come back to that because it's related. It can be related to a number of different things, particularly if you're going to talk about things like budget. You may want to think about that. Also, things like town elections can be useful in considering that. How you use the evaluation is up to you, right? If you have something in the superintendent's contract that has to do with evaluation cycles, or if you choose to say we've had an evaluation that does X, and so that is up to you. And then the process for completing the evaluation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Yep, sorry, absolutely.
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
How many indicators do you recommend?
So generally speaking, you want to have kind of more than one per goal. I mean, first of all, that's just math, right? Because you've got 4 standards to make sure you cover. But it also tends to allow for a more kind of full evaluation of the goal. And by that, I mean, you're not only thinking of the implementation of curriculum in terms of, for example, if that's what you're doing, in terms of the instructional leadership, but you might also be thinking of it in terms of the family and community engagement, right? Like, think a little bit cross-standard in terms of the indicators that you use. So, I mean, if you're doing that, you're probably doing at least 6, but that's also a really good conversation for the committee to have. Superintendent's probably going to be coming to you with, these are the indicators I recommend for each goal. But for the committee then to say, are you fully supporting the goals? Do you feel like you've actually, and also, do you feel like you're fully hitting the 4 standards in the way that you're choosing to use the indicators?
So let me ask you a question. Suppose that we're evaluating professional culture.
Yep.
And we have, and I don't think this will happen here. Suppose we have 15 grievances with the union, and all 15 are sustained against us. We could not use that to evaluate professional culture.
So to the
Not provided by the superintendent.
The superintendent actually is presumably bringing forward grievances to the school committee. That's part of the process.
No, but what I'm saying is you could not take the ruling from the PELRB against us. We would have to say, well, the superintendent said, here's what we were doing, and I think we should have been found right, but we weren't, and that's it. We couldn't use, for example, the PELRB's written order saying that the grievances were sustained as a mechanism to evaluate professional culture.
As the point that you made earlier, I would expect that would come up in the comments that you would be making on your evaluation.
Okay.
What he's asking is, if it's not provided in the self-evaluation part and the documentation provided by the superintendent during the evaluation process, can we take it into account? Because she did not provide it, it's just knowledge we have from outside of that self-contained self-evaluation from the.
I think here is where you would want to step cautiously. And this is one where, depending on where you're going to go with it, getting district legal counsel involved is useful because these things can rebound. If what you're talking about is something that was brought to you as information that you as a school committee would naturally have anyway, it wouldn't at all, I think, be out of order for you to actually make that part of what you're talking about. What we end up in trouble with is when we end up with school committees saying out, we're going to go out and collect information and then bring that part back for the evaluation. That one starts to get shaky in terms of whether or not you're grounding yourselves based on the evaluation process as set up by the
So
department.
let's go back to the PDLRB. They've issued a written order.
Mhm.
It is legally binding on the school district,
Mhm.
but it has not been provided.
Mhm.
Are we barred from using? Yes or no?
I wouldn't say so.
So we could use it as part of the professional culture, even though it was not provided by the superintendent.
And I think that you probably, depending on what kind of impact that potentially is going to have on your total evaluation, you may well want to have a conversation with legal counsel about it.
But it would be. But it would be inappropriate for us to do something like send out a survey to all the teachers about professional culture on our own, not with the superintendent, that says, is she doing a good job?
Mhm.
And then that would not be something we're not going to be doing anyway. But that would not be something we would be able to consider an evaluation, and mostly we just like not.
Yes.
So I think that's what you're saying.
Mhm. Yeah.
We should.
I mean, and as you already sort of have fleshed out in a couple of the other things you're talking about in terms of response rates, surveys get shaky on those kinds of things too, of who chooses to respond versus who doesn't and that kind of thing. So, yeah. People with that, yes.
Such a good response rate, and I swear I've ever seen it.
So far what we've been talking about is each of you is going to complete this, right? But then the evaluation of the superintendent is actually a composite evaluation. It's the committee that evaluates the superintendent, not individuals. So it is the job of someone, and this is one where you can appoint a subcommittee to do it. Sometimes people appoint a compiler to do it. It can be the chair who does it. It's up to the committee to decide who it is that's going to do the compilation. Again, like we talked about before with the goals of the subcommittee, if you choose to appoint a subcommittee, remember, this is actually not a reason for executive session, so you'd have to do it in public session. Keep that in mind. So once you've collected all of the individual evaluations, they go to the compiler. It's compiled by whoever the designee is. And then that composite evaluation is what then goes to the full committee at a public meeting. You discuss it at a committee meeting. It is a document that is under your purview, so it is for you as a committee to choose if you wish to accept it as presented, to amend it, to add things to it, again, through vote of the committee. It's not an individual decision. And then that composite that is agreed upon and voted at the committee meeting is actually the evaluation of the superintendent. Keep in mind that this does need to be a document where everyone's voice can be heard. That does mean both minority and majority votes. It shouldn't just be anyone sort of trying to convert this to numbers that you can actually somehow average or turn into digits. It's again intended to be a language-based evaluation. And do talk about how comments will be handled. I know there are committees that do a lot of cut and paste. It's really better, again, in terms of creating a composite document, that you instead actually create comments that are the composite of the comments that are put forward by the committee. So things you can actually, to finish up and to give you sort of more things to look at, right? There's things that are on our website about superintendent evaluation. They're including, among other things, the PDF of the actual document. And then the other thing that's that the department has is not only the rubrics, they also have the implementation guidance that actually came out in terms of how you actually go through this and do this, what the requirements are. And then a couple of years ago, when they did the sort of overhaul of the implementation, they worked with MASS, with MASC, and they actually jointly did it with the department, which actually did some videos that are actually about the parts of the process, and again, making it a meaningful process that isn't just a, we evaluated the superintendent because that's what we had to do, but how are we using this to improve the district, to improve the superintendent as an educator, to actually improve communication about what we're doing in the district and so forth. So those are other things that you can use. And that's it.
So what is the traditional timeline? Fine, what is the traditional timeline? Like for this, like when will we be getting these goals, et cetera?
So that's up to you, for you to discuss with the superintendent, because in part what she's presumably going to do is to be creating the goals as a result of her intake process as a new superintendent. School committees tend to like to operate on school years just because we all kind of get in that zone. The one sort of wrinkle that you run into as a school committee is, particularly for towns, is that also tends to run you into town elections. So something that is good to suss out ahead of time is also if someone leaves the committee before you get there, if a new member comes on, who's actually doing the evaluation. It is the sitting committee that evaluates the superintendent. However, you evaluate the superintendent based on your experience of the superintendent as a committee member, which, depending on timelines, can be pretty short. That is why we ask you to think about the data you're using too, because for a long time, people were trying to evaluate based on MCAS data. But if you're trying to evaluate the superintendent in like May or even July, you're not going to have MCAS data until October, right? So that's why, tying things to internal evaluations can be better if you're going to use anything like that. But yeah, the thing that you're required to do is annual. When you do it is up to you. And you may, since what you're doing with a new superintendent is giving her time and space to actually do some of the intake, presumably before she comes up with goals, you want to then actually sort of offset your calendar accordingly. And you're not tied to one eternal calendar forever either.
So annual just means the school year.
Annual just means sometime during,
Reading
like
off.
during the year.
We
Yep.
did it in May, right before the election.
2 years.
That was 2 years ago,
Mhm.
which was strange because I had only been on
Well,
for a year. So
And Dr. Fitchman didn't take office until July. So
Yep.
would it be July?
we talked
Would be
with her
a-
about it. And
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
did you have thoughts on that already, or did you want to?
I was thinking do the.
Okay, yeah, and then we can do June this year and then see what happens.
Mhm.
'Cause- Yeah, I gotta. Yeah, because the town elections are the first, second week or third week in May. Usually, and that's when terms start. So that might be something to consider.
Yeah.
Instead of June, we might want to do May. So you're being evaluated by people who've been with you, or maybe not. Yeah, because it's a strange, you can only consider things
Yeah,
that
you'll have to get reelected.
we're gonna get you reelected. You have to run again.
I wouldn't
Yeah,
be
my year
evaluated
too.
if I
Yeah,
was
my
on.
year too. Yeah, so
May.
if we weren't back in June,
You'll be
but-
back.
and
No, just
How does-
something that sometimes towns choose to do, and this is again, your choice, is if you have a member who is leaving and the evaluation is going to happen sort of after they've left, you can actually choose to, if the committee wants to, the leaving member can complete a rubric and essentially submit it to the committee
and then you.
to be incorporated. And then again, it's the sitting committee that does the evaluation. So again, your choice.
I think I mean, maybe we could put on an agenda as a future action item.
Yep.
Yeah.
But given that you were the only, it would be really silly for us if you didn't get reelected to not listen to your. So like,
But you gotta run.
I would
Get
be,
reelected.
I would strongly be in favor of taking the members' opinion.
Yes, agreed.
And we also have to negotiate that with Dr.
Right.
Chris. This is a collaborative
Yeah.
process with her, because this is her evaluation. It's gotta be strange. sitting
And
there.
I like, I'm just saying
Um,
if I wasn't.
You would, I don't wanna do it.
Yeah. Like these rubrics, it's not normal for us, like it seems.
Yes.
Is this expected to change at all? Because I know these things change.
Nope.
Okay,
I would I would be surprised.
Not asking you to promise. it's not
No,
but-
the overdraft of the educator evaluation system in 2011 came through as part of Race to the Top. Which as you might know was a national effort. It was Massachusetts responding to that. And the evaluation system was actually sort of like a subcategory of what was under Race to the Top. It was a pretty big lift by both the legislature and the department, so I would be surprised.
I also don't think we're gonna have any federal changes, given that they're going to disband the Department of Education.
The documents are from 2019.
Yep.
That I was just.
Yeah,
on
I
the
just
website.
Wanted to know if there's something we need to, sometimes things change and.
So that wasn't that
I
long
like to
ago.
be
I think,
prepared.
Desiland.
Yeah, in terms of
Not-
storm clouds on the horizon or things that are over that wouldn't make my list
Okay.
of things I keeping an eye on.
We're more likely to be defunded than. we're not.
Exactly.
Oh, often. Oh, yeah, no. Okay, yeah, so I think we should probably have the discussion very soon at like
Yeah.
a subsequent meeting. And put into place, so,
Contingency plan.
well, how we're going to approach this in a calendar. So traditionally. Well, not traditionally, but the time I did it, Dr. Burnham met individually or with groups of 2 school committee members to discuss goal settings and where we are and kind of go over things. I don't know if you wanted to do it in a meeting or if you wanted to do smaller groups, but that's kind of up to you because you're the one who comes to us with it. So, yeah, we can look to you for how you'd like to shape that, if it. everyone's
I
in-
mean, the way that they did it the last 3 times that I did it was, I did one like, I took over for somebody who
Oh,
resigned.
yeah.
So like I did one like the first 2 months I was here. It made no sense. So she just met with each of like, I called her on the cell phone. She's
Mhm.
like, here's what I was thinking about my goals. I was like, okay. So it wasn't like complicated.
And I don't think we did it this year.
No,
Because she would leave it.
because she was later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this
It's
year.
pretty common.
That didn't happen.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of other things to focus on.
Mhm.
But we'll let you drive on that and you can let us know if you want to meet or if you wanted to have a discussion in a meeting about it.
Whatever you want.
Can I ask Tracy a question
Yeah.
that's not related to this? I am very interested in legislative advocacy.
Yep.
I used to work in the state legislature for a while,
Mhm.
so I wanted to know how I can get involved at MASC with legislative advocacy. I was a lobbyist for a while, and I really, that's the reason I'm on this committee, is because I want us to get more money. So whether you have meetings, whether you have a, call-in, I've been trying to be involved with the MTA. They have a very big, I'm not a teacher, but they're just letting anyone get involved if they want help. So we went and testified, a whole group of us, and I think we have a decent relationship with our legislators. So I guess partially I'm pitching to you, please use us. And also, busing is terrible and there needs to be some solution on the busing front. I have some ideas, but I think the busing companies should be regulated like the special ed schools are. I think it should be
Yeah, we submitted testimony.
we submitted some different testimony and stuff, but please.
So there is MASC does have a legislative committee, which is
Okay.
made up by members across. So if you go onto the website and look
Okay.
under there's directions on how you actually would submit your name for that.
Okay.
And my understanding is that it tends to be pretty like open in terms of if you want to be on it, please come be part of it.
Yeah. I want to be on it.
Yep. And I mean, the other thing is that the current president of the association actually was the chair of the legislative committee before he became president. So Jason's pretty on top of that kind of thing.
Can you
should
introduce me to him?
Yeah,
Via
or you can, I
email?
mean, you can also send him an email directly off the
Via
website.
This website.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, About Us then has the board members and
Okay.
they'll be on the top of the list somewhere there.
Okay.
Good. I'm glad, by the way. That's great.
Oh, Brandon Robbins is on the committee. I know him
There you go.
from Leominster. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think does anyone, any more questions about? We're back to roles and responsibilities. Okay. Do you know when you guys are opening up more charting the course options? There's only
So
two on
the-
the calendar.
I actually saw it. There's 2 on the calendar.
There's two on the
the-
calendar, but they're like,
September, right, the September, October ones are on the calendar. We will talk as we get closer about whether or not we do a December one, which largely is going to be targeted at people who got elected in November for the cities and are starting in January. And then there's always a January one. Yeah. So we tend to schedule by calendar year. I think we'll probably have our conversation in September about when we're scheduling for the next year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Saturdays it's in the summer are tough. I can't believe you staff too. I mean, because that was the schedule. I looked at them.
Yeah,
There was 3 Saturdays in the summer.
No, yeah, charting the course is always on Saturday because our assumption is that school committee members work full time.
No, I know, but the summer Saturdays are just hard. I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just curious if you have a lot of turnout because I was like, not.
Yeah, no,
sorry,
so
not-
right. So the bunch of them that happened April, May, June is because most of the towns have their elections there.
See, we don't
So-
get elected till the end of May, so
Yep.
we.
So you
can't
just
do
had the
April
2
or
in-
May,
yep.
and then I only had a June and.
You had the 2 in June.
Yeah, June was recital day and July was I don't know,
Yep.
ahead of plans.
Yep.
so.
So yes, we've got the September, October, which I know are in different parts of the state, but
One's in Franklin, that's actually not
yeah, Tri-County.
better than.
And Smith Folk's a nice ride and it's also a vocational agricultural school. So if you like animals, it's a nice perk.
Incredible. Long.
Yeah. I have to wait for football schedule and then I'll let you know.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Good. Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you for your
very
time.
much.
Excellent.
Tony, you want to adjourn us or you want me to? do
Yeah,
it? Motion to adjourn at whatever time it is, 5:41.
All right. All in favor?
Bye.
Let's go.
All right,
Thank you.
when is our next meeting?